Hello, everyone. I'll start now. My name is Tony La Viña, and I'm excited to guest host Welcome Change today. I'm a member of the board of directors of Ashoka Philippines. I actually co-founded Ashoka Philippines, started Ashoka here with Terry Jaime Mora quite a while ago, more than 10 years ago. And I continue to be active with the work of Ashoka here, including in helping find fellows. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, which is about the future of regenerative tourism. Uh, and I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce our guest today. I can actually say that I was one of the first Ashoka people in the Philippines to meet Ann Dumaliang because, like her, I am also environmental activist, conservationist, a climate justice person. And Ann is all of that. Plus, Ann is a geotourism advocate, co-founding the Masungi Georeserve in the Sierra Madre Mountain Range, which is very near Manila. So having a reserve, a georeserve, an hour away from a major metropolis and conserving that is quite a feat. And so that reserve has become a model for privately led conversation, sustainable forest restoration, responsible human-nature interaction, and local innovative design adapted to our country's realities and really to global realities. So we'll talk about that and also personal things, the things that motivate Anne to do this. Please put into the chat if you have questions or the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll ask those questions after the initial conversation. So Anne, thank you for your work and thank you for showing us the way. How are you today? It been a good day, a tough day? Always both good and tough for you?
Always
Would you let
both
us
good and
know?
tough. Yeah, it's a privilege to be working in an area like this. But of course, at this time when elections are coming and we have a lot of enforcement activities running, it can also be challenging and you tend to be on your toes regularly. But we're happy that despite all of this, we get to contribute to conservation in the country, of course.
What are the challenges that a geotourism advocate like you and the reserve faces in a developing country like the Philippines?
Well, from the tourism side, I wouldn't really say that there is too much. A lot of the things that we face when it comes to challenges have something to do with the restoration and reforestation work that we've committed to do. So, a brief of a backgrounder in 2017, we entered into a memorandum of agreement to restore some 2,100 hectares of land around the initial conservation site that we are working on. So this area is particularly challenging because we're looking at public land, public forest land, which of course leaves it vulnerable to a lot of social political issues and concerns. So the challenges that we face in this area really, I guess, roots back from the fact that 80% of that we have this 80% financing gap for conservation in the Philippines. So in essence, we are still at our baby stage.
Anne, can you? I think Anne got choppy or low. Yeah, let's wait a minute. Maybe the signal uh, is problematic. We just wait for Ann to come back. She'll come back. In any case, while we're waiting for Ann, there's Ann back. So Ann, you're back. Thank you.
I disappeared. I'm so
You're
sorry.
in the mountain, Ann, and mountains in the Philippines are notorious for its, you know, limited access. So it's fine. Would you like to continue or?
Yeah. So I was saying that in the Philippines, we have this 80% financing gap for conservation. So if you look at this, this really leads to us having parks that are indeed legislated, but do not have the necessary and the needed financing, management, and enforcement mechanisms on the ground. So for instance, just when it comes to the basic requirement of having boots on the ground, to monitor and patrol these areas, we're currently working with a ratio of 1:4,000. That's one forest ranger to 4,000 hectares of land, which, is such a huge responsibility. I'm not sure how that exactly works. So the challenges we're dealing with on the ground right now have a lot to do with land speculation and quarries. So land speculation is something that we deal with a lot, and we put heavy emphasis on, right? Because when it comes to taking illegal occupation and possession of land, that's really where it all starts. That's where development aggression begins. And if you can nip it at the bud right at that stage, then you can prevent a lot of destructive activities from flourishing and continuing in your sensitive sites and areas. As for the quarry, it came to our attention sometime in 2020 that there is apparently a 1,500 hectares of our reforestation site overlaps with 3 quarry mining agreements. So that is a current challenge that we are dealing with in
And how
Masungi.
are you dealing with the challenge, Anne? I mean, it must be, I think you're dealing with lawsuits, you're dealing with police harassment, you're dealing with even, people that are, have a, very selfish interest in the areas that you are protecting and conserving and enhancing in terms of reforestation.
I think we are lucky because to one extent, through the years that we've been operating, a lot of people were able to see what we are protecting and how we do things. So as far as this information goes and as far as credibility is concerned, a lot of people do know that we are serious with the work that we do. A lot of them have seen it firsthand, being visitors in our trails. And that activity is really also what allowed us to really gain a following, really advocates for this area that we are conserving, largely coming out of our visitors and the people that we get to engage online. So coming from that, right, is having a tourism initiative that tries to enhance and showcase the character of this destination, have more people fall in love with it the way we do. We're fortunate to have more than 260,000, no, 280,000 followers online who continuously are vigilant for the challenges that we face and who continuously try to contribute in the ways that they can in overcoming, what we are currently facing in the Philippines. Sorry, in Masungi in particular. So, so many things happening all at once. We're happy to have just people coming together to put out petitions. Currently, we have one that has about 18,000 signatures already. Um, we have people who have expertise in enforcement, in engineering, in security and politics, in law that involves you, Dean Tony, lender resources, really to help push the conservation project forward and remove all of these illegal activities. So it's really just a lot of citizen movement, a lot of youth-led action to bring all of these forward. But when it comes to the strategy end, right, of course, there are also components about visibility, building the profile of the place, more of preventive approaches, incident response systems. What else? Social fencing mechanisms that we have to work on so that we can, continuously protect this area despite all of that.
It's very impressive, Anne. Something struck me, and I caught something really interesting from what you said. How do you make people fall in love with nature, Anne? How do you make people fall in love with stones? Right? Because you are dealing with stones. You're at Georeserve. So how do you do that?
um, I guess we are in a very lucky place, Dean Tony, because I have been interacting with this landscape since I was 6, 7 years old.
Yes.
I've grown to know the ins and outs of it, what makes it magical, what makes it awe-inspiring. Um, and because of the trails that we have,
Makes it
um,
magical. Anne,
yeah,
can you
yeah.
can you describe what makes it magical?
What is magical? What is
What makes
magical?
it magical?
Magical for me would be um, really seeing the interactions among the different components of a place, the people, the animals, the plants, the water, seeing how all of that is interdependent, getting to know it so much that you wonder how it all came to be to that extent, right? That's magical for me. Yeah, so as far as the trails go, does that answer your question? It's a little bit fluffy.
No, yeah, yeah, and but I'm gonna push a little bit more, and we talked about this, right? And I know we're always shy about talking about our faith, and about God, but in this space, I think it's all right to talk about that. Uh, does this, do you see, as you said, how did this come about? How did these stones come about where they are, right? I mean, uh it's not completely arbitrary, right? I mean, is there? Can you share a bit what your reflections are in terms of your faith, of what you feel you're being called to do? In fact,
Right,
in here, it's a mission. You've
right,
said.
yeah. So, as far as magical and the faith goes, of course, there's a science behind all of it, but the level of interdependence, interconnection, how species and how elements of a place um, change through time and evolve with consideration to the elements around it. Um, it's just mind blowing for me, to be honest, right? And being a conservationist who literally was raised in an all-girls school that's strongly linked to Catholicism. Every day, when I enter the classroom, it's an hour blackboard. It says faith, peace, and integrity of God's creation. Those were the three things that my grade school institution would hold dear, right? So even at a very early age, it is so dear to me. It's a privilege for me to be able to contribute to maintaining the integrity of God's work. Um, and that's really shaped my perspective when it comes to solutions thinking, to problem solving, right? When you're given the chance to see a social problem, to see what ails a system, and to have an idea of how it could potentially be solved, it's a privilege and it's an opportunity extended to you by God, by a higher power. And you wouldn't be doing it justice if you don't do anything. That's my strong belief, even very early on in life. And I'm sure in Catholicism, we have this perspective of God's kingdom. I think other faiths would have something similar of their own. But I really like the idea of being a vehicle to bringing that not just in heaven, but bringing it on earth, right? Bringing paradise on earth, protecting it, sustaining it, making it real, not just for people, but for other forms of life.
Thank
Was that
you.
too wordy?
No, no, I mean,
I could
I
go
think,
on and on too, but
yeah, you can go
there
on and
you
on.
are.
So I actually will ask a few more questions, and maybe if you can have I can look at the question and answer. There's one. Uh, uh, if you have already, I don't think I see any. No, not yet. And neither do I see in the chat. There's some questions already. Um, uh, let's start with the question and answer part. Then I'll have other questions later at the end. So, Anne, what are the decision-making levers that you've found most powerful in dealing with deforestation or quarrying issues? I mean, what 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 matters? What can be influenced in those decision-making? And maybe in this context also, how important is citizen power in dealing with the challenges that you're dealing with? Terms of the
Yeah.
quarries, the resorts, the contrary uses that is contrary to a reserve.
Right. So, um, if you're talking, I'm not sure if I am answering this question correctly, but a large part of what we do in Masungi is really just influence by making sure that we have a strong focus on conservation. That has been our guiding light, our guiding principle through all of the decisions that we make, through all of the actions that we take, right? And this is perhaps the reason why, even when we're dealt and given very challenging circumstances, it's not exactly easy to go up against a quarry. Um, and all of these generals who are occupying land, right? Politicians who are occupying land, we still persist and do what's needed because that's what we're around for. That's the mission that we are supporting, and I think that is something that's very relevant and important, not just from a conservationist perspective, but from anyone who's involved in destination management, for anyone who's involved in urban planning, right? Because at the base of it all, if you're unable to sustain what gives life to an area, then effectively you're compromising it for the long haul. You're compromising it for the long term, right? And that is, I guess, a constant problem as far as conservation goes. We tend to think short term, when in fact these are ecosystems and processes built through time and can't be recovered when you destroy it in a matter of a snap of a finger or a short term of 6 years. So I think that is a very important thing to keep in mind. To
That's how we
address,
lost our forest, no? Uh,
yeah,
through decades. There's a question from David Bondbright. Are conservationists in the Philippines getting better at collaborating? What helps them collaborate? Um, are you able to share, Anne, your experiences, your lessons, and are you able to learn from others as well?
I'm actually really proud of young people in conservation, and even more mature ones, such as Dean Tony, because beyond Masungi, it's really to one extent an ecosystem of practitioners trying to help each other out and trying to lift the work of each other. Someone has told me about this about in business. I'm a management student. I have friends who come from the business side, but it's always fascinating for them to see how we pass on opportunities to each other, and support each other, sometimes even without pay, just to support the work that we all do, right? And I think this really comes from a grounding and an understanding that for us to save this earth, to be honest, considering the climate crisis at hand, it will really take radical action and radical collaboration, um, to make it happen. And I'm happy to see it in our youth, in our young ones who are trying to fill in gaps that they see, who are trying to use their expertise to make conservation a reality, right? So when we're talking about using skill sets for conservation, I'm not just talking about being a part of a conservation organization, right? It's also about seeing your expertise, seeing your line of work, and understanding how, in principle, um, in your daily interactions, you can contribute to sustainability and environmentalism, right? So you see these and the artists trying to raise funds for conservation, for the engineers who are trying to use their expertise to help the infrastructure needed for conservation, etc., etc. Um, really,
Yeah.
just green jobs for everyone and green work for everyone, right?
Uh,
Yeah,
I've
so I do believe everyone is getting better at collaborating, working, and using their skill set for it.
I echo that, Anne, having been, advanced in this work than you. I mean, Monsignor's work by at least 25 years. I have seen that collaboration grow. And one thing is tools. We have so many more tools now than we used to have. No? So I was actually wondering if I can ask you to talk about the tools that you have from social media to other kind of communication and scientific tools that you have. How does that help you in your work?
Social media honestly helps when it comes to quick incident response, since we're so busy with enforcement at the time, right? So when you're talking about forests, you're talking about remote areas that are typically not even visible to a lot of people. For a lot of people, your forests are an abstract concept, that they do not get to interact with on a regular basis, and they do not exactly know what's happening in there. So to have a social media outlet, you know, for you to be able to give updates on what's going on in the ground really allows them to have a clearer picture of the challenges being faced, and also allows them to support the work that's being done and to call out for action from decision makers, from politicians, from people in leadership, right? And the social space, um, brings a lot of people together. I think when it comes to the environment, it's a concern for a vast number of people because it impacts so many people, right? So when in the social space, that becomes more visible because more people are coming together for it, right? When typically it's only communities who are seeing it and feeling it head on who can speak for what's going on. So I think that's the huge part of what enables the advocacy work that we do. And it's especially useful, of course, for Gen Z, millennials who are very environment conscious. Um, what else? Technology. Um, Drones, cameras, even are very important for documentation. The drones are interesting because recently we purchased a drone that has a 28x zoom. And on the first day of using it, um, we found our park signages at the back of the house of an environment offender. So returns so quickly. Returns are coming in so quickly, right? So it's interesting because it allows you to get a better surveillance of the areas you're moving in, not just when it comes to robbery, theft, and all of these really, but monitoring the forest cover, seeing where encroachments are happening, being able to fly over real time to collect evidence of a fire or an illegal logging activity. So
Or
it's interesting really how technology um, brings about real-time interventions in that sense.
you have to show that to me next time I'm there and show off your drone. How about government? Government policy, government institutions are always complicated in the Philippines, and I know you have to work with them a lot. How do you navigate that, Anne?
Hmm, honestly, it can be very difficult because even the mindset for conservation isn't something that's always present in government. It's not something that's a given, even when you look at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, right? So there are people who are trying, and there are people who simply do not understand even up until now. And we have had several rough patches, but I think in general we remain, hopeful for our institutions and the people who are part of them. So, say for instance, if you talk about the military, there was time in 2016 when there was a time in 2016 when they erroneously supported the land grabbing group instead of us, someone who was trying to claim 100 hectares of forest land. So there was a lot of tension that happened. But at the end of it, we were able to understand each other, reconcile. And then that was when they became a partner for enforcement and conservation. which is actually a big deal because it is the military who happen to have a tactical expertise moving through these mountains. So coming from a very difficult start, I'm happy that we managed to become partners for conservation, and everyone's all the better for it today. And that's generally my mindset for all of the government institutions that we are working with or may still be bumping with up until now. As far as conservation goes with government, I do believe that there's a lot of room for collaboration between government and the private sector. There are several financing gaps, for instance, within government that the private sector can resolve, is say given the right incentives, given the right technical support and um, enforcement even support. So if we are to move towards protecting what remains of our forest, I think that's very critical, that we move towards that complementary, collaborative mindset instead of being two areas bumping heads with each other.
Very good.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just a couple of final questions, which are all related to sustainability, actually. One is your relationship with the communities around you. How do they get to benefit from the work that you do? And second is very specific to regenerative tourism, right? I mean, there are off seasons, right? And actually, you had a long off season with the pandemic. So, how do you survive, especially for your workers, your the people that rely on you, even the communities that you partner with? How do you approach that?
Oh, the pandemic was definitely challenging. There was no tourism for about 2 years. We'd have maybe 1 day, 2 days a week, and 2 weeks of operations, and then none again. So we're just fortunate that the way Masungi is modeled is that we save up for the place, and so we have budget for risks, such risks. And because of that, we are still able to operate and even pursue conservation better um, for 2 years, right? Even when there's no revenues coming in. So I guess that's an essential, that's a wonderful part of a destination stewardship approach, right? You don't just quit on an area just because there's no revenue streams coming in. What you do is you try to remedy opportunism that will arise during that period. And that's essentially what we've been busy with in the last 2 years, countering increased environment opportunism, providing aid to our communities, empowering them through this period, taking it as a chance for them to learn more about protecting their culture, protecting the environment, and yes, countering disinformation about COVID-19. That took up a lot of time too.
Thank you, Ann. I mean, here's Ann, a Ashoka Fellow from the Philippines and a close colleague of mine, also in the community of practice on environment and conservation and climate change in the Philippines. She combines, religious faith, a scientific mind, with a lot of imagination, passion, and integrity to do this work. That's not just about tourism, not just about nature, but above also about people and making sure that nature and people are able to profit from each other. So thanks to Cole and Ice for plus Ice for partnering with us on this episode of Welcome Change. Also to Waka Foundation, who's helping us find social entrepreneurs like Ann in Southeast Asia. Very honored to have hosted this, and thank you and good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Dean Tony.